February 3rd is known as the day the music died. But why is that? What is it about this aviation accident that sets it apart from all the others?
To understand, you have to get to know the people who were involved, their journeys, their successes, their struggles. It begins with Charles Hardin Hawley. Hawley spelled with an E-Y, interestingly. Hawley was born in 1936 to a Lubbock, Texas family during the Great Depression. He was the fourth child, earning the nickname Buddy early in childhood. His whole family was very musical, and he learned to sing and play guitar with his siblings as a child. One of his earliest performances was joining his older brothers for a talent show, playing the violin. Well, maybe not playing it. Young Buddy did not know how, so his brother Larry greased up the bow so Buddy couldn't make any sounds. But the brothers won that contest, setting off a lifelong inspiration.
When World War II began, two of his older brothers went into the military and, as a souvenir of sorts, brought back a guitar. Buddy, who was now 11 and taking piano lessons, abandoned the piano to learn how to play the guitar instead.
By high school, Buddy was entering and winning talent show contests. He was influenced by musicians like Hank Williams, Jimmie Rodgers, and Bob Wills. But at night, when the radio could pick up faraway stations, he'd listen to rhythm and blues and decided to start mixing that in with his country sound. Like so many others, when Buddy graduated high school in Lubbock in 1955, he was determined to enter music full-time. This was cemented when he saw Elvis performing live in Lubbock. He continued performing locally and even got the opportunity to open for Elvis. This is when he really started getting noticed outside of Lubbock. And it wasn't long before he was signed to the record company Decca.
Funny enough, in the contract, Hawley was misspelled, mistakenly leaving out the E from his name. But he rolled with it, and from then on, he was known as Buddy Holly, Holly.
Well, as talented as Buddy Holly was, success did not happen overnight. Things did not take off with Decca as they hoped, and the label dropped him after the initial contract. This could have become an almost was type of story, but he was determined to make it. He partnered up with Norman Petty, got some new musicians, and switched to lead guitar himself. And when he recorded That'll Be the Day, he achieved the sound he wanted. Because Decca had a clause that restricted him from releasing songs under his name, he changed the name of the band to The Crickets, and things finally took off. The songs were coming and charts started getting conquered, and Holly was a true hit. And by November of 1957, he was performing on the Ed Sullivan Show, propelling him into stardom. But success usually breeds a new set of struggles. Buddy had fallen in love with New York City and moved there, and while fighting over the royalties with the managers and handlers, his relationship with manager Petty ended, and his band members, having sided with Petty, decided they wanted to stay behind. It all ended amicably, but when the money was being held up in lawsuits and disagreements, Buddy was forced to get a new band and go touring to make some money. And that's when the Winter Dance Party Tour began.
Buddy had gotten into a little music producing and helped a Lubbock DJ record some songs. That DJ's name was Waylon Jennings. For the Winter Dance Party Tour, Buddy got Waylon to play bass guitar, Tommy Allsup on lead guitar, and Carl Bunch on drums. Also on the tour was up-and-coming star Ritchie Valens, as well as the Big Bopper, J.P. Richardson. The tour was set to begin in January 1959, but right away the logistics were horrible with a whole bunch of crisscrossing. It was like the tour company had just thrown darts at a map on the wall without any forethought. The unheated tour bus, which was really a reconditioned old school bus, not even good enough for children, broke down twice in freezing temperatures. Carl Bunch was hospitalized for frostbite on his toes.
After only a week and a half on the tour from hell, Buddy had had enough. So he chartered a 4-seat airplane for himself, Allsup, and Jennings. The idea was to fly out of Clear Lake, Iowa after the night show and head to the next venue in Moorhead, Minnesota. The Clear Lake show ended just before midnight. Waylon Jennings volunteered to give up his seat to J.P. Richardson, who had come down with the flu. Ritchie Valens asked for a seat on the plane, and Tommy Allsup agreed to flip a coin for a seat. Ritchie called heads and won, or lost, depending on how you look at it. Interesting side note, Tommy Allsup would later open a restaurant bar right here in Dallas, and he called it the Heads Up Saloon.
Which was shortly closed afterward.
So maybe not as lucky.
Buddy, Ritchie, and JP headed to the Mason City Municipal Airport, where they met the pilot, 21-year-old Roger Peterson. The plane they were to fly was a 1947 V-tail Bonanza, November 3794 November. It's important to note the weather conditions that night. The ceilings were maybe 3,000 feet and snowing with winds blowing around 25 knots. The blowing snow lowered the visibility to around 6 miles and was deteriorating fast. The pilot, Roger Peterson, had 4 years of flying experience and had 711 hours logged, and was generally described as building his life around aviation. But his flying background would come up later in the investigation.
At 12:55 a.m. on February 3, 1959, the Bonanza took off from runway 17, which today is runway 18. Hubert Jerry Dwyer, the owner of Dwyer Flying Service, who owned the Bonanza, watched the airplane take off from a viewing platform outside of the control tower. He was able to see the taillight of the plane as it initially climbed, then as it turned left, but then the taillight gradually descended until it disappeared. A few minutes later, when Peterson failed to make the expected radio contact, repeated unsuccessful attempts were made to reach them.
A few hours later, after the sun had come up, Dwyer took off in another plane to try and find them. It didn't take long. He spotted the wreckage less than 6 miles from the airport. This was a very short flight. The Bonanza had impacted the ground at a high speed, estimated to have been 148 knots. It impacted with a steep bank angle to the right and nose-down attitude. The right wing had hit first, and the airplane cartwheeled for over 540 feet before coming to rest against a wire fence. Everyone but the pilot was ejected from the fuselage. J.P. Richardson was the furthest from the wreckage, which led to rumors of him having initially survived and tried to crawl for help. But this was proven to be false many years later when a subsequent autopsy revealed that just about every bone in his body had been broken. The occupants had died right away. The music was gone.
But why did Peterson crash? The attitude indicator plays an important key. Pilots use an artificial horizon to help them stay oriented in the clouds. Conventionally, the blue top is the sky, the bottom brown is the ground. But in the Bonanza that crashed, it had a Sperry F3 attitude indicator. The display is very similar, but the motion is the exact opposite. The ground is on the top and the sky is on the bottom. It's especially easy to do as a new rated instrument pilot, but furthering the story, Peterson had actually failed his instrument check ride 9 months earlier and had not retaken it. He only had around 50 hours of instrument instruction, no rating, and had also done his instrument training in a plane with a conventional attitude indicator, unlike the Sperry F3 attitude indicator. I couldn't find how much time Peterson had in the accident aircraft, but even if he had been flying it, he was accustomed to the conventional attitude indicator and could have easily slipped back into that frame of mind, interpreting the attitude indicator in the opposite.
So Peterson was not qualified to fly into the clouds, which is what pilots refer to as Instrument Meteorological Conditions, or IMC. When you fly into IMC, it's extremely easy to get disoriented. You can feel like you're level when you're in fact turning, or climbing when you're actually descending. Flying into IMC, you must rely on your instruments to tell you what your attitude is, not what your body is telling you. In addition to the pilot not being qualified, the company that owned the Bonanza, Dwyer Flying Service, was not allowed to operate in IMC either. Yet, on that night, both the pilot and the company ignored the rules, all for the price of $36 per passenger.
The Civil Aeronautics Board, the precursor to the NTSB, ruled that the crash was the cause of pilot error and an incomplete weather briefing. Specifically, the pilot's unwise decision to attempt a flight that required skills he did not have.
The aftermath of the crash lingers to this day. It's said that Buddy Holly's family learned of his death with a news report, causing his young wife to have a miscarriage. This led to changes in policy to no longer disclose victims' names until after the families have been notified. Many stories, movies, and biographies of the victims have been made, and who can forget the 1971 hit American Pie by Don McLean.
This crash not only signified change, it was the loss of a generation of music. Rock and roll was up and coming, and many have speculated that losing these musicians forever changed the course of music. It's worth mentioning that Jerry Dwyer, the owner of Dwyer Flying Service, lived until 2016 at the age of 85. He said that the crash haunted him throughout his life, from being sued to countless harassment from strangers. But over time, he became friends with the families of the victims. He even wound up using the negative attention for good. He helped establish college scholarships for music students.
What can we take away from this tragedy? Well, it serves as a reminder that many of the rules we fly by are written in blood and not to be ignored or broken without consequence. Also, it's important to be very familiar with your airplane, its systems, and its avionics, especially at night or in IMC. It's all a classic reminder that superior judgment trumps superior skills.
What do you guys think? Should Roger Peterson have agreed to take on the flight? Do you think it was just a case of unintended spatial disorientation? Feel free to leave your comments below, and please remember to be respectful.
These cases are not easy to discuss, as they often end in a loss of life, but we must learn from them so that we can try to prevent them in the future.
If there's a case you'd like us to review, please leave your suggestion in the comments. I want to thank our sponsors who support us to make videos like this. You supporting them helps us.
And if you haven't seen Christy's report on John Denver, check it out right here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Taking Off.